I stood near the casket in a navy coat I'd sewn myself, while his new wife and her cousins snickered behind their sunglasses. She actually showed up? After he left her for a girl half her age? Another whispered, probably here to beg. For furniture. Their laughter pricked like needles, but I didn't flinch. Then the lawyer stepped forward, cleared his throat, and unsealed the will. His words sliced through the air. The house was never transferred. Legally, it still belongs to his first wife. And just like that, the silence was mine. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I wasn't always the woman people whispered about. There was a time they called me the backbone of the Raymond family, the teacher-turned-builder's wife, the woman who held everything together with patient hands and quiet grace. I married Tom when I was 24. We met at the community college. He was studying architectural drafting, and I was training to become a special education teacher. We were both stubborn, poor, and sure that love would be enough. When he decided to start his own construction business, I didn't hesitate. I gave up teaching to help him build it, literally and figuratively. I kept the books, managed invoices, scheduled client calls, and designed our business logo on an old computer with dial-up internet. I cooked lunch for the crew from our small kitchen and brought it to the job sites in Tupperware containers with masking tape labels. Everything we built together. The house was our crown jewel. A 3-bedroom ranch just outside town, perched on a hill he always said gave the best sunsets. We couldn't afford contractors for most of it, so we did the work ourselves, nights and weekends, hammering and painting with sore backs and blistered hands. Tom used to say, "One day we'll grow old on that porch together," and I believed him. Our son, Michael, was born in that house. I remember nursing him in the half-finished nursery, drywall dust still in the corners, while Tom fell asleep on a mattress laid out on plywood floors. We didn't have much money, but I had this sense, this knowing, that we were building something sacred. Not just walls and roof lines, a life, a legacy. I spent decades living in that belief, loving through all the late-night client emergencies, the lean winters when we had to choose between oil for the heater and new shoes for Michael, and the silent stretches where Tom became distant. But I never thought he would leave. Then, at 51, just after our 27th anniversary, he said he needed space, claimed it was work stress, that he was going to stay at the rental property we owned, just for a while. A few months later, I was served papers at my sister's house. No conversation, no warning, just a courier, a manila envelope, and the kind of legal language that made your skin crawl. Irreconcilable differences, division of assets, dissolution of marriage. I called him. He didn't answer. Michael told me to give Dad time, but he already had someone else. She was 28, his assistant, the same girl I'd once brought soup to when she had the flu. In the divorce, he offered me a modest settlement and insisted on keeping the house for the sake of appearances. I was too shocked to fight. My attorney wasn't aggressive. I signed where they told me. I moved out with 2 suitcases and a storage unit full of memories. No one explained that while his name had been removed from the title years ago for liability reasons, mine had never been removed. I left thinking I had nothing. For the next 7 years, I lived in a small apartment near the edge of town. I worked part-time at the library. I made quilts for the cancer wing at the local hospital. I grew invisible. Friends stopped inviting me to things. It's complicated, they'd say, since he and the new wife were still part of the social circle. I found out they got married 6 months after the divorce finalized. They posted photos online of their dream home, the home I had designed, built, bled for. In one post she wrote, "Couldn't be more grateful for our forever home." Our son, Michael, stayed neutral. "Dad made mistakes," he told me, "but what's done is done." He'd visit occasionally, always in a hurry, always careful not to say too much. I never pushed. I didn't want to become the bitter ex-wife people rolled their eyes at. I told myself I had chosen grace. But in truth, I had chosen silence because I thought it was the only option. Until one day, I sat across from a tax consultant who asked a strange question. "Ma'am, your name is still on the deed. Did you mean to keep it that way?" I blinked. "What do you mean, still on the deed?" She turned her screen toward me and pointed. My name, printed clearly in bold. There had never been a formal transfer of title. I was still, legally and publicly, the sole owner of the house. I had walked away thinking I had nothing left. But the one thing I built with my whole soul, the home they now use to mock me, was never truly his to give away. After that meeting at the tax office, I walked back to my apartment in a kind of fog. The woman had printed out a copy of the property record and handed it to me with a raised eyebrow, like she expected me to have a story to tell. But I had no words for her, just shaking hands and a heartbeat that wouldn't slow down. My name. My name was still on the deed. All those years, I thought I'd surrendered everything. I believed I had nothing left but memories and a few handmade quilts. But the truth had been sitting there all along, buried in paperwork, waiting quietly like a seed under snow. I didn't act right away. For weeks, I tucked the document into a folder and placed it in the back of my file drawer, behind my old lesson plans and a worn recipe book. I couldn't bring myself to confront it. What would I do with that knowledge? March back into the house and announce my return like some soap opera heroine? That wasn't me. But the curiosity started to gnaw at me. I began to drive past the house, slowly, carefully, like I might startle it. The maple tree we planted our first spring together was still there, taller now. The shutters I painted that soft robin's egg blue were now beige, lifeless. A security. Camera blinked above the garage. The woman he left me for, her name is Amanda, had taken over every corner. I saw potted plastic plants hanging where I once kept wind chimes, and a mailbox stenciled with their initials, T and A. I remember thinking how cruelly appropriate that looked. The final insult came from a neighbor, someone I used to bake, pies for every fall. She didn't recognize me at first as I walked past her garden. "Oh, you're Tom's first wife, aren't you?" "Yes," I said, steady as I could. She gave a strange little smile. "Amanda told us. She designed the house. She said you barely lived there. Barely lived there." I went home and sat in the dark for hours. Amanda had not only taken my husband, she'd rewritten me, erased me like a smudge on glass. What stunned me more was the silence from Michael, my own son. I brought it up gently. Over coffee one weekend. "She's telling people she designed the house," I said, trying to sound curious instead of crushed. He sighed. "Mom, she probably just means she redecorated. Why are you digging into this stuff now?" "Because it was my life," I said. "That house was my life." He stirred his coffee and didn't meet my eyes. "It's just a house." I wanted to scream. But I didn't. I just nodded and said I had to get going. You learn a lot about people when you stop playing the part they're used to. The second you shift, even a little, they look at you like you've broken some unspoken contract. I was supposed to stay silent, gracious, forgotten. I wasn't supposed to know what I knew. I spent the next few weeks learning, researching. I visited the county records office. I requested copies of the original title transfer agreement, the divorce settlement, and the post-divorce property filings. And what I discovered was nothing. There was no transfer of title. He'd removed his name years earlier when he was going through a lawsuit, some kind of business liability protection. We had agreed back then it was safer to keep the house under my name alone. Ironically, that decision, made to protect him, ended up protecting me. When we divorced, the settlement mentioned property division in vague terms, but the title itself was never updated. Legally, in every record that mattered, I still owned the home, and Tom? He either never noticed or didn't care. Maybe he thought Amanda would handle it. Maybe he thought I wouldn't fight. He was right for a while. But something had changed in me. It wasn't about revenge. I wasn't plotting to throw anyone out on the street. I didn't want to march in and strip the curtains off the walls. I just wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted the world to know that I had been there, that I built that place, that I mattered. One morning in early spring, I made an appointment with a real estate lawyer. Her name was Nadine. She was maybe 10 years younger than me, with a direct way of speaking that made me feel like I could breathe again. After I laid out everything, the divorce, the ownership history, the current occupants, she leaned back in her chair and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Well," she said, "this is rare but clear. You are the sole owner of that property. They're living in a house they don't own. And if I did nothing, they could live there forever if no one pressed the issue. But if you wanted to act, legally, you have every right to reclaim or sell. It's yours." I sat very still, feeling both ancient and brand new. I didn't want to act just yet. Tom was sick. I'd heard whispers of his condition from a cousin. Stage 4 liver cancer. He'd been declining for months. I hadn't seen him. He hadn't called. Some might have taken this opportunity to make noise, file an eviction, serve papers, but I waited. I waited because I knew what was coming, and I wanted them to hear it not from me, but from the one man they thought had buried me for good. The truth sat quietly in my hands, undeniable and sharp. And when the moment came, it wouldn't be me who spoke it. It would be his lawyer. And every person who had ever laughed at me would have to listen. I told myself I was just passing through, that I only wanted to see the house one last time. But that was a lie. What I really wanted was to stand in front of it, not just as a memory, not as a discarded wife, but as someone who still belonged. It was a Sunday morning. The sky hung heavy and gray, like it wasn't sure if it wanted to. Rain. I parked my car half a block down and walked the rest of the way. Slowly, one step at a time, like my legs had forgotten the rhythm of that street. When I reached the edge of the driveway, I hesitated. The lawn was manicured but soulless. Gone were the hydrangeas I'd planted, white and blue, each one named in my mind. In their place stood rows of potted succulents, cold, decorative, easy to ignore. I rang the doorbell, and after a minute, Amanda opened the door. She didn't hide the surprise on her face. "Can I help you?" she said flatly. "I used to live here," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I was just passing through, thought I'd stop by." She looked me up and down, arms crossed over her yoga tank top. "Tom's not doing visitors today. He's not well." "I didn't come to see him," I said. "I just wanted to look at the house, from the porch, if that's all right." She didn't move. Her mouth curled into a sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That was a long time ago," she said. "I think it's best if you leave. We're trying to keep things peaceful around here." Before I could respond, she shut the door. Stood there for a moment, facing a door I once painted barn red with my own 2 hands. Now it felt like it had never belonged to me. As I turned back to the street, I noticed something else. The neighbors, 2 women across the road, were working in their front garden. They looked up, saw me, whispered, then turned their backs as if I were some kind of trespasser, a ghost that had wandered into their clean little world. That night, I sat in my apartment and stared at the copy of the deed again. I traced my name with the tip of my finger. I thought about how long I had accepted erasure, how long I had apologized for being in my own story. The next few weeks brought more quiet humiliation. I found out Amanda had been telling people she chose the finishes in the kitchen, she had paid for the custom beams, and that she had pushed for the stone fireplace. something I had dreamed of since our first year of marriage. The fireplace I begged Tom to build with me, the one I grouted, by hand. It was like watching someone else wear your skin and call it theirs. And no one, not one single soul, stood up for me, even Michael. I asked him gently if he had ever corrected Amanda when she told people she and Tom built the house. He sighed again. He always sighed these days. Mom, it doesn't matter. Let it go. The house is just a house. You're better off not reopening old wounds. But they're not old to me, I said. They never healed. He looked uncomfortable. You've got to stop dwelling on the past. I mean, I get that it's tough, but Dad's sick. Amanda's taking care of everything. This isn't the time to stir up drama. Drama. That word stuck in my ribs like a shard of glass. A week later, I received a text from my cousin Marie. It was short, abrupt. He's gone. Passed this morning. Funeral's Thursday. No one called. No invitation. No word from my son. I sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like an hour, phone still in my hand, waiting for a message that never came. Grief is a strange thing. I wasn't mourning the man Tom became. I had already grieved that loss years ago. I was mourning the echo of the man I married. The one who whispered to me at midnight when our son was born, "This is our forever." The man who carried drywall across snowy ground just to finish the nursery. The man who made me laugh so hard once I burned dinner. But he wasn't that man anymore. He'd left me long before his body gave out. I made one decision that night. I was going to the funeral. Not to make a scene. Not to reclaim anything. I was going because I had every right to stand in that room, to be seen, to be remembered. I wore a coat I hadn't worn in years, navy blue, wool, hand-sewn by my mother. I braided my hair back like I used to when I worked, beside him on site. I arrived early, sat quietly in the third pew, alone. Amanda came in late, flanked by her sisters, one of whom leaned over and whispered, not so quietly, "Can you believe she had the nerve to show up?" Another chuckled. She probably thinks she's still the wife. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I didn't even look at them. But when the lawyer stood up after the service to begin reading parts of the will for those gathered, I turned my head and waited. I wasn't invited. I wasn't welcomed. But I was present. And when the lawyer opened his folder, so did a door I thought had been sealed forever. The day after the funeral, I stayed in bed long past sunrise. The room was quiet, except for the sound of wind scraping against my window. Outside, a heavy sky pressed down on the world, but inside me, something had begun to rise. I kept thinking of their laughter, how it echoed during the service like a choir of vultures, how they tilted their heads, their pity disguised as superiority. They thought I was there to cling, that I came out of desperation. But I came because it was mine too. The life, the story, the loss. Still, I needed time to breathe, to remember. What was true, not just what they'd replaced me with. So I pulled out an old shoebox from the back of my closet. Inside, fragments of the woman I used to be. A Polaroid of Tom and me standing barefoot in the skeleton of the house we were building. I was holding a paint roller, and he had his arm slung over my shoulder. We were covered in sawdust and smiles. I ran my finger over the photo. I picked. The layout, I whispered to no one. I planned the kitchen triangle so I could cook and still watch Michael play. Flash. I'm 27 again, in a flannel shirt and denim skirt, standing in the kitchen with blueprints spread across the counter, Tom's hands on my waist as he leans over my shoulder. "You've got a knack for this," he says. "You missed your calling." "Maybe I found it," I reply. We laugh, and he kisses the top of my head. That moment felt like forever. Flash. A winter night. I'm 6 months pregnant, standing outside in the cold, holding a flashlight while Tom hoists up drywall in the unfinished hallway. The flashlight shakes because my hands are numb, but I don't say a word. I just watch him work and imagine our baby walking down that very hall someday. Flash. The last night. The final dinner. I'd made roast chicken, lit a candle, thought, maybe we could find our way back. Instead, he said, I can't do this anymore. I feel trapped. You don't make me feel alive. My hand froze on the wine glass. He kept talking, but I couldn't hear. The ringing in my ears drowned him out. I remember staring at the gravy boat and thinking absurdly, that's my mother's china. Don't let him take that too. I blinked, back into the present, and there, tucked at the bottom of the box, was something I hadn't seen in years. A letter. It was folded in thirds, yellowed with age, written in my own handwriting. I had completely forgotten about it. To me, from me. July 1989. I had written it on my 23rd birthday, the year Tom proposed. A note to my future self. I unfolded it slowly, fingers trembling. Dear me, if you're reading this, I hope you haven't forgotten what you were made of. You are not here to disappear behind someone else's dream. You are soft, but not weak. You love hard, but that doesn't mean you owe everyone your silence. If you're ever lost, come back to this. You built, you held, you mattered. Never let them rewrite you. With love, the girl who still believed. I pressed the letter to my chest and wept. Not the kind of weeping people see in movies, no dramatic sobbing or gasping, just quiet, full-body grief, the kind that rolls in like fog and stays in your lungs. I had bent myself backward for decades, shaping myself into whatever kept the peace, wife, mother, bookkeeper, ghost. And still, they erased me. The woman at the funeral, the one they snickered at. They didn't know about the girl in the blueprints, the woman in the flashlight beam, the wife who grouted tile at midnight so her husband could rest. But I remembered, and remembering gave me clarity. That house wasn't just real estate. It was a record. Every nail, every floorboard, every decision. It had my fingerprints all over it. I looked at the deed again. My name sat there like an anchor, not out of revenge, not even justice, but truth. I picked up the phone and dialed Nadine. My lawyer, she answered on the second ring. Mrs. Raymond? Call me Lydia, I said. There was a beat of silence. All right, Lydia, what can I do for you? I want to take steps, formal ones, quiet but firm. You're ready? Yes, I said. I've been ready for years. I just didn't know it. Have you ever let something go, only to realize later it was your strength, not your weakness? Share with me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. I once thought forgetting was the only way to survive, but it turns out remembering, fully, deeply, is how you begin to live again. And now, I wasn't hiding anymore. I was coming home. 2 weeks later, I received a voicemail from Amanda. Lydia, it's Amanda. I got your letter. I don't know what to say. I didn't realize. I thought Tom handled all of that after the divorce. I really believed the house was ours. Please, can we talk? I didn't call her back, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to discuss. For years, no one had spoken for me. Now the paper trail would do it. By the time Nadine finalized the quiet title action, Amanda had already packed up most of the house. I heard from a neighbor, one of the few who still acknowledged me, that a moving truck had come the weekend prior. The curtains were gone, the flower beds uprooted, the porch swing we'd built together replaced by a hollow metal bench. Even the welcome mat was missing. Amanda never reached out again. Not directly, but Michael did. He came by my apartment the following weekend. No warning, just knocked on the door, holding a cardboard box full of photo albums I hadn't seen in a decade. I found these in the attic, he said. Thought maybe you'd want them back. He stepped inside, looking older than his 30 years. His eyes were tired, softer than before. I didn't know how much of it was really yours, he admitted. The house, The work, the history. It's all right, I said. You weren't supposed to know. You were just a kid. But I'm not now. He looked down at his hands. I should have asked questions. I should have stood up for you. I poured us tea. Neither of us touched it. I'm not angry, I said, but I want you to understand something, Michael. That house wasn't just a place. It was the sum of sacrifices you never saw. The hours, the decisions, the things I gave up so your father could build his name. He nodded. I believe you now. We sat in silence, flipping through the albums. He stopped at one, a picture of me in overalls kneeling beside a stack of tiles. Mom, you look so strong here. I was. He swallowed hard. I don't think I ever gave you credit for what you built. You weren't the only one, I said gently. A few days. Later I got the official paperwork. The title was clear. I now held not just the name, but the indisputable claim. The house was mine. Still, I didn't want it anymore. It was filled with too many shadows, too much revisionist history. So I put it on the market, quietly, without fanfare. My agent was discreet, and within a month, I accepted an offer from a young couple expecting their first child. They reminded me of Tom and me. Once, idealistic, hungry to build something of their own. I left them a note on the kitchen counter. This house was built with love and sweat. I hope you fill it with both. L.R. The closing happened on a Thursday. Rain again, just like the day I saw Nadine. It felt circular, like the end of one orbit and the start of another. When Amanda found out, she posted something online, a vague, passive-aggressive status. Some people take back what they never really wanted just to prove they still can. I didn't reply, but the unraveling had already begun. People around town started to whisper, but this time, it was about them. Neighbors questioned why Amanda had lived in a house she never owned, why no one knew the full story. An old friend from church called me out of the blue and said, "Lydia, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. You were always so quiet about it all." Quiet, that word again. They used it like a flaw, but I began to see it as power. My silence hadn't been surrender. It had been strategy, and now, without raising my voice, I had rewritten the ending they tried to give me. One afternoon, I stopped by the property for the last time. The buyers hadn't moved in yet. The house stood clean, emptied, echoing with the ghosts of who we used to be. I walked room to room, hand-brushing the familiar walls, the bedroom where I read bedtime stories, the kitchen where I hummed while stirring soup, the hallway where I once leaned my head against the door, listening to Tom argue on the phone, never knowing it would be the beginning of the end. Finally, I stepped into the living room. The fireplace stood tall, proud, and unchanged. I knelt beside it, opened the small drawer under the hearth, and placed something inside, my wedding ring, not out of pain, out of peace, because it didn't fit me anymore, in size or in meaning. They had spent years trying to build a life on top of my silence. But in the end, truth has its own voice, and it doesn't need to shout. A month after I sold the house, Amanda showed up at my new cottage. She didn't knock right away. I saw her through the front window, standing by her car, arms crossed tightly over her chest, staring at my porch like it had personally offended her. The wind tousled her perfectly arranged curls. Finally, she walked up the steps and rang the bell. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Her eyes darted around the front garden. I'd planted snapdragons and lavender the week before. My hands still smelled faintly of soil. "This is where you ended up?" she said, gaze sweeping. "Over the modest home." "This is where I chose to end up," I replied. She shifted her weight. "I'm not here to fight. I needed to understand why. You had the house for years. You let us live there. Why take it back after he died?" I didn't answer right away. I wanted the silence to stretch. wanted her to feel what it meant to be unanswered, even for a moment. Because truth has its own timeline, I finally said. It comes when it's ready, not when it's convenient. She looked at me, frustrated. We built a life there, you know. No, I said calmly. You built a lie in someone else's home. Her mouth parted as if to argue, but she didn't. You walked through rooms I designed and called them yours, told people I barely lived there, took credit for things you never even knew you touched. I didn't come after you when Tom left me. I didn't make noise. I didn't shame him or shame you. I let it all go. But that house, my house, wasn't part of the deal. Her eyes glistened. She wasn't crying, but she was close. He told me he'd changed the deed, she said quietly. Then maybe that's your real grief, I said. Not what you lost, but what you believed. She nodded slowly, swallowed hard. I just wish he'd been honest. Don't we all? We stood there for a beat longer, two women bound by a man who was now only memory. Then she said something I hadn't expected. You were never the villain. And she walked back to her car. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like the moment after a storm when the trees stop swaying and the water settles. That night, I made tea and sat on my porch. The lake shimmered under a half moon. The wind moved through the pines in slow waves. And for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to imagine a future untethered from the past. I started dreaming. Not the kind you do with your eyes closed, but the kind that quietly unfurls when you feel safe enough to hope again. I thought about going back to school, not to teach, but to learn, maybe botany or small business. I had an idea for a fabric store that offered free classes for women starting over. Quilting, knitting, sewing, the kinds of quiet skills that help you rebuild more than just clothes. Called Nadine the next day. I'm thinking about setting up a scholarship, I said. Something small, for women over 50 who want to finish their degrees. She smiled through the phone. Sounds like something the woman who built her own house would do. I laughed softly. That woman's just waking up. Later that week, I met with the couple who bought the house. They were young, just married, glowing with the kind of nervous excitement I remembered in my bones. They invited me to walk through with them one last time before they officially moved in. Only if it's all right, I said. We'd love that, the wife replied. We feel like we're inheriting a story. That word, story, made something settle in my chest. Inside, everything had changed. New paint, new floors. The sunroom had been turned into a nursery, but the bones of the place were still mine. The husband paused near the fireplace. We found a ring tucked inside the drawer. Was it yours? I smiled. It was, but it belongs there now. They didn't press, just nodded with reverence. Before I left, the wife hugged me. Thank you for building something so beautiful. You're welcome, I said. On my drive back to the lake, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. Week later, I received a handwritten letter in the mail. The envelope was pink, the handwriting messy and uneven. Inside was a drawing of a house and a stick figure holding a watering can. It was from my granddaughter. Hi, Grandma. Daddy said you like flowers. I hope I can see your garden one day. Love, Ella. I held the letter to my chest and wept, not from sorrow but from arrival. From knowing that maybe, just maybe, the parts of me that had been erased were blooming again in places I hadn't even seen yet. The house was gone. The battle was over. But the story was still being written. And this time, I was holding the pen. A month passed, then another. Summer settled over the lake like a soft shawl. The days stretched long, and the evenings carried a hush I hadn't heard in years. No traffic, no slamming doors, no voices behind closed walls questioning whether I still mattered. For the first time in my adult life, I lived alone, and not from loss, but from choice. I spent mornings tending my little garden. The lavender bloomed early, and the tomato vines were wild and unruly, just like me. In the afternoons, I worked on the foundation for the scholarship I dreamed of, the Still Blooming Fund, for women over 50 returning to college or trade school. Nadine helped me set up the legal side. I made a quiet announcement in the local paper, just a short column with a black and white photo of me taken in the 80s, smiling beside a pile of lumber during construction of that house. Applications started to come in almost immediately. Some handwritten, some typed. Stories from women who'd survived divorce, widowhood, caretaking, reinvention. One had scribbled at the bottom of her form, "I didn't think anyone would care if I started over at 61. Your story made me feel less alone." It undid me. I sat at my kitchen table and let the tears fall freely. Not grief, not anger, just release. A letting go of years I'd folded into myself. I hadn't just taken back my name, I'd given it weight again. And now it was opening doors for others. Michael visited more often now. At first it was quiet, just short check-ins, mostly out of obligation. But one afternoon, he brought Ella. She was 7, shy, with curls like her father's and eyes too old for her face. I was nervous. Children can sense things, resentment, fragility, discomfort. But she stepped inside like she already belonged. She wandered through my cottage, pointed to the bookshelf. "You read chapter books?" she asked. "I do," I said, smiling. "Sometimes, out loud, when the story's really good." "Daddy says you used to read to him," she added, "when he had a tummy ache." I looked at Michael, who just nodded. A quiet acknowledgement, a small crack in the wall between us. Later, Ella helped me water the garden. As we knelt by the rosemary, she looked up at me and said, "Do you miss your big house?" I paused. "Sometimes, but this one has more peace in it." She thought about that. "Peace is better than space?" "Most days," I said. "Yes." She nodded like she understood something adults rarely do. Before they left, Michael lingered by the door. He looked around the cottage, eyes soft. "You did this," he said, "all of it." "I had help," I replied. "Pain, time, memory, they were all part of the build." He looked down, swallowed. "I've been meaning to say, I was wrong. About so much. I think I just didn't want to see who Dad really was. And I didn't want to believe what that meant about me." "You're not him," I said. "But even he wasn't always who he became." "I wish I'd asked you about the past sooner." "I wish you had too," I said honestly. "But we're talking now. That's something. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just looked at each other, finally seeing clearly. Amanda never contacted me again. I heard through the grapevine that she moved out of state, started over apparently somewhere near her sister. I wish her peace genuinely. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that revenge rots the hand that holds it. Closure doesn't come from someone else's apology. It comes from standing in your own truth and not flinching. The cottage became more than a home. It became a haven. I hosted monthly tea circles with women from the community, widows, caretakers, divorcees. We didn't sit around and complain. We planned gardens, we shared poems, we passed down recipes. We talked about the lives we'd put on hold and how to start claiming them again. In September, I received an invitation. Grandparents' Day, 2nd grade tea party, 1 guest per child. It was written in glitter pen. Ella had tucked a pressed daisy into the envelope. I arrived early, wore my navy coat, the same one I wore to Tom's funeral. Only this time I walked into the room, not as someone trying to prove I existed, but as someone who knew she did. Ella ran up to me, grabbed my hand, and said, "That's my grandma. She has her own garden and makes the best mint tea." The other children smiled. Some teachers glanced over. No whispers, no questions, just a little girl proud of her grandmother. "If you could reclaim one thing, your name, your peace, your space, what would it be? Let's talk about it below." I read every word you share. They thought they buried me beneath a life they stole. But I didn't need to be rescued. I just needed the silence to become my soil. And now, everything they tried to erase was blooming in full color. Sometimes I still dream about the old house, not the version they turned it into, the magazine-perfect photos, the beige walls, the cold decor. No, in my dreams, it's the house we first built, the one with chipped paint on the baseboards and mismatched doorknobs we found at salvage sales, the one where laughter echoed from the kitchen, where Michael's crayons stained the hardwood in the hallway and we never bothered to scrub it out. I walk through it in silence. Not as a ghost, not as someone trying to reclaim something, but as the woman who made it, brick by brick, with hands that bled and a heart that believed. Then I wake up. The cottage is quiet. Sunlight spills across the floor in soft ribbons. The smell of rosemary and fresh earth floats in from the open window. And I remember that I'm not lost in the past anymore. I'm here. Fully. Finally. For years, I thought moving on meant forgetting. That to keep peace, I had to sever myself from every injustice, every insult, every time I swallowed my own truth just to keep someone else comfortable. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering, and then choosing differently. Remember everything now. I remember how hard I loved, how deeply I gave, how fiercely I believed in things that didn't last. And I remember how I found myself again, not through rage or retaliation, but through rooted, quiet resolve. It would have been so easy to let bitterness guide me, to use the deed as a weapon, to chase down apologies that were never going to come, but instead I chose something harder, wholeness, because I didn't want to just win. I wanted to heal. The world doesn't celebrate quiet women. It doesn't know what to do with the ones who don't shout, who don't demand, who simply endure. But there is power in endurance, power in stillness, and an even greater power in reclaiming yourself without asking for permission. I used to think silence was what buried me. But it wasn't. It was the soil I grew in. Now, when I walk through the rows of lavender outside my cottage, I feel taller than I've ever been. Not because I own something, not because I won something, but because I remembered who I was, and I refuse to let anyone else rewrite that story. I speak now, not to settle scores, but to sow seeds. I tell my truth so other women, especially those who've spent years being invisible, know that it's never too late to be seen, to be heard, to be whole. If someone had told me, even 5 years ago, that I'd be living by a lake, running a scholarship fund, teaching young girls to sew and older women to dream again, I would have smiled and said, that life belongs to someone else. But it doesn't. It belongs to me. I earned it, with every heartbreak I survived, every night I stitched my dignity back together, thread by thread. I am not what they said. I was. I am not forgotten. I am not bitter. I am becoming. So if you're sitting somewhere tonight, on a couch too small for your dreams, or in a life someone else convinced you to settle for, I hope you hear this clearly. It is not too late. Your story didn't end when they walked away, or when they laughed, or when they rewrote the truth in their favor. You are not finished. You are in progress. And the most beautiful part of your story might still be waiting just outside the door you thought had closed forever. I was never just the woman he left. I was always the woman who would rise, and now the world will remember my name.